Hi everyone, in this video we are going to talk about the fascias and spaces of the pelvic floor and perineum. And I'll do my drawings on these figures, which are primarily from Thieme and also from Gray's Anatomy for Students by Drake. In the upper left image over here, this is an oblique view of the female pelvis, which gives us a nice quasi three-dimensionality of the structure. The image next to it is the same picture, but with the pelvic organs removed. You'll notice in the picture on the right there's a nice view of the levator ani, the obturator internus, and the piriformis muscles, and also the coccygeus muscle. But you can't see that on the left because of the pelvic organs. These images below are the orientations of sagittal, coronal, and axial views, or a lithotomy view of the pelvis. And what I'll do as I talk about the different fascias and spaces is I'll refer to each of the different orientations. So let's get started. Let's take this out, and this. Okay, so we're going to zoom in on this figure right here. And we'll start talking about the peritoneum. So in the abdomen, the peritoneum was the sheet on the anterior wall and also the posterior wall. That would be our parietal peritoneum. And there we go, our parietal peritoneum. And when it enveloped an organ, you might remember that that parietal peritoneum became visceral peritoneum. And whenever we had a reflection onto an organ like this, that was where we found our transition. So this would be parietal peritoneum, and this would be visceral peritoneum. So the concepts still hold true in the pelvis. Parietal is up against the body wall, and visceral is up against the organ. The difference here, though, is that in the abdomen, our organs would be towards the back wall. So this cylinder here, say for the rectum, would continue like this as a sigmoid colon, and it would be towards the back wall this way. But in the pelvis, the organs are pointing this way, inferiorly. So the consequence of that is that the peritoneum ends up laying on top of the organs, not just up against it. So our retroperitoneal space in the abdomen would have surrounded or been behind the peritoneum in the abdomen, but our retroperitoneal space in the pelvis is below the peritoneum. So the angle has changed in terms of the view. And that right there, that orientation can make an enormous difference when you're considering what's going on here. So that also means that our retroperitoneal tissue is going to be posterior to the peritoneum in the abdomen, but in the pelvis it will be contained below or inferior to the peritoneum. And just as in the abdomen, this retroperitoneal tissue, the fatty tissue, surrounds the organs all the way around, as I'm attempting to draw here with the highlighter. Okay, so if we go to this image down here, this is now, again, a sagittal cross-section. We see the same idea. Here is our abdominal peritoneum becoming our pelvic peritoneum as it goes around the organs. All right. Our retroperitoneal fascia would have been behind the peritoneum in the abdomen, or posterior, but in the pelvis, it's inferior, surrounding the organs here. And the same idea would go for the male. So here is our peritoneum. It lays on top of the organs. And our retroperitoneal fascia in the abdomen is posterior, but in the abdomen or in the pelvis, it is inferior to. Here is where the fascias are located as we translate what I've drawn here in the sagittal view to the coronal view. So the fascias highlighted in yellow are going to be located in this space, which for all practical purposes is the retroperitoneal space. You might hear it as the endopelvic space. This is the endopelvic fascia, which again is in continuity with the retroperitoneal fascia. And the same thing goes for the female. This is located here around the organs. All right, as so. So you might be thinking, well, okay, what is happening in other places? So what's going on down here in this space? And where is that? So that would be in the female, and down here this would be the male. Well, that's the ischioanal fossa. So that is located inferior to the levator ani, or the pelvic diaphragm. So here is levator ani. Now it looks like a V-shaped structure as a cut edge, previously in the female, here in the male. But again, it is a bowl. So if we look at this diagram, this is an oblique view. So what I would need to do is cut a view that looks like this. Through the pelvic diaphragm, and what you would see is this edge right here, and this edge right here. Your eye would be looking this way. At that edge. So here, your eye would be looking at that edge. So that's what this looks like in these coronal views. You're looking edge on at levator ani. And inferior to that, located in this region, the ischioanal fossa, is a layer of fat. Now, this is not within the peritoneal cavity, so this has a completely different name. It's just the fat of the ischioanal fossa. If we look on this diagram, that's the fat that's surrounding in this region. In most dissections, sometimes that fat is taken off in the initial dissections of the back and limbs because the sacrotuberous ligament is cut, and that is the space that you encounter. So what's important here is understanding where this coronal image is. This coronal image, the coronal images on the left, are cuts through here and through here. We're not seeing cuts in this region in the anus. The images on the left are completely different. So that brings me to the pudendal nerve, which is coursing in the ischioanal fossa, located here in the female, here in the male. And I have to erase some of this here. In this drawing, that pudendal nerve is coming this way, as you can see with the green arrow that was original there. It courses outside of the greater sciatic foramen and then takes a turn and goes in the lesser sciatic foramen. The pudendal nerve emanates from the sacral plexus. So let's draw that here. So we're going to have our sacral nerves, which come out this way. And all right, so will come out this way. And from that sacral plexus will be the pudendal nerve. And what it does is it branches off one of these little branches and comes together, S2, 3, 4, and it goes around the ischial spine and courses in the ischial-anal fossa here to get to the UG diaphragm. And along the way, it's going to do all sorts of branching like this. You can't see it in this diagram because the levator ani is covering it. What does that look like over here? Again, here's my pudendal nerve, which I drew originally in black, but it's essentially coming this way, and it's going to split around the UG diaphragm, so including here the superficial transverse perineum muscle. So it goes this way, and it goes this way, and it will send all sorts of branches to the different muscles and the skin of this region, eventually to reach the clitoris. Same thing down here with the male. Goes around the ischial spine, is exposed here in the urogenital triangle, in the anal triangle, which you can see the ischial-anal fossa, and it will innervate these muscles all along here. Just to reiterate this in the coronal views, the pudendal nerve is traveling in this region that's already highlighted called Alcock's Canal, and it is in the ischial-anal fossa, of course, in both the males and the females. Let me erase this so you can see this better. Okay, that's the pudendal nerve. That brings me now to the urogenital diaphragm. In this cross-section of the female, we see the urogenital diaphragm here as the floor, and we see it also here in the male, in the coronal views. Where is this located in the sagittal views? In the female, it's located here, and in the male, it's located here. So the thing that's important about the urogenital diaphragm, let me mention on the axial views, the urogenital diaphragm is located here, in the female, and here in the male. Should draw this all the way out. There we go. Note, while we're here on this image, that the superficial transverse perineal muscle, which I'll draw in orange here, is not part of the urogenital diaphragm. It is a separate muscle that joins here at the perineal body. It's this perineal body that holds everything together, by the way. Also note that the urogenital diaphragm does have a sphincter. It does have a sphincter right here around the urethra in the females, and also in the males. You can, so I'll sort of draw it right there, but you can't see it through the bulb of the penis. And it is the sphincter is not part of the urogenital diaphragm, but it is contained within the space that bounds the urogenital diaphragm. So for this demonstration, I'm going to have to show all four of these images. So let's look at the fascias that surround the urogenital diaphragm. So there is a fascia here that surrounds the diaphragm, and a fascia here on the males that surrounds the diaphragm. This fascia is a continuation of the deep fascias of levator ani, obturator internus. I'll draw it on one side there. Here's levator ani and obturator internus. This is deep muscular epimysium. It is not subcutaneous fascia. What you see on this side in the image on the right, I'll erase this over here. Okay, on the image on the right, is you see that deep fascia is this white membrane that's covering this entire region. We have a name for that, and it's called the perineal membrane, or the inferior fascia of the UG diaphragm. As you can guess, there's a superior fascia of the UG diaphragm. You can see that here. We don't give it a name. This perineal membrane, on the other hand, is a significant line as it demarcates or separates the superficial part of the pelvis, which is in this region, from the deep part of the pelvis, which is in this region. Why is that important, you might ask? Well, almost everything that is within the pelvis or in the superior part or above the urogenital diaphragm is going to receive visceral innervation. Everything that is inferior to the UG diaphragm, including the UG diaphragm, receives somatic innervation. And that somatic innervation is provided by none other than the pudendal nerve. Yay! The visceral innervation comes from the sacral splanchnics and the pelvic splanchnics. Sacral, sympathetic, pelvic, parasympathetic. Back to the UG diaphragm and the fascias that are surrounding it. This containment means that the superior or deep or inner part of the pelvis is definitively separated from the superficial part of the pelvis or the perineum, so that I'll draw in a different color here. I'll draw it in green. Notice that there's another fascia that contains this area. This is called the superficial space. By the way, the urogenital diaphragm, if I haven't said it already, plus the external urethral sphincter are contained within the deep space. So, deep space and superficial. Some authors will consider this deep pouch, superficial pouch, deep space, superficial space. We're talking about the same thing. In the male, it would be bounded here. Okay, so the superficial space contains the erectile tissue of ischiocavernosus, the crus of the penis over there, and also the spongy part that's around the bulb of the penis. It also contains the muscles. We'll use red for muscles. It contains the muscles ischiocavernosus and bulbospongiosus, and like any other muscle that we've seen that's somatic, it's going to have its own deep fascia. So here's our deep fascia. By the way, I mentioned that everything superior to UG diaphragm is visceral and everything is inferior is somatic. That actually does not include the muscles. So levator ani and obturator internus are somatic structures. I just wanted to clarify that. So where does Coleys fascia come from? Well, Coleys fascia was a continuation of Scarpa's. So here, I think we're using green. So here, Scarpa's fascia is this membranous fascia that is deep to Camper's fascia in the anterior abdominal wall. And what it does is it comes down this way and will envelope the superficial space in this region, like this. A little less defined in the female, certainly more defined in the male. Goes around the penis, around the scrotum, region here. Okay. Now, the deep fascia of the urogenital diaphragm here will continue as Buck's fascia around the penis. So what that does is it contains, certainly in the male, not as much as important in the female, but it contains this deep space here in the penis from the superficial space in the scrotum and in the perineum. And we'll learn from another video why that has some important implications. What does that look like in the other views? So we talked about the female, and again here is the superficial space bounded by the green line, located here. Okay, so all of this is in the superficial space. In the male, again, this is all in the superficial space. That's in coronal section. What are we looking at in terms of the axial section? Well, when I'm at this point, the cut fascia of Coleys is already on the borders. If I'm already looking in this view, Coleys fascia is gone. I'm actually sitting in the superficial space, looking directly at the inferior border of the deep space. And remember that these spaces are only contained within the urogenital triangle. So same thing here in this male view. When we're talking about superficial spaces, we're not including the ischioanal fossa in either the male or the female. Okay, let's review. So I'm going to take this image and we will copy it over here. And we'll blow this up a little bit so we can see a bigger view. All right, we have organs that sit in the true pelvis. In this case, we're looking at the uterus, we're looking at the vagina. They are covered by a peritoneum right here. And that separates the retroperitoneal space, if you will, from the intraperitoneal space, which is up here. That also means that the retroperitoneal fascias that are in continuity with the posterior abdominal wall need to be, deep to the peritoneum. So they're going to surround the fascias, they're going to surround the organs inferior to the peritoneum. But the pelvis has something extra. It has a pelvic floor which is comprised by the levator ani, and it has a urogenital diaphragm which provides an additional support. The fatty tissue, I'll draw this one in purple, located between the levator ani, the urogenital diaphragm, obturator internus, this fatty tissue is fatty tissue contained within what's called the ischioanal fossa, and within that ischioanal fossa are the pudendal neurovascular bundles. Inferior to the urogenital diaphragm is what's called the superficial space, right here. So if this is the superficial space, then the fascias surrounding the urogenital diaphragm form the deep space. Contained within the contained within the deep space are this deep transverse perineal muscle and also the external urethral sphincter. Within the superficial space Contained in there is the cavernous tissue and the ischiocavernosus, the cavernous tissue and the bulbospongiosus on either side. Remember that the deep fascias of the skeletal muscles, all innervated somatically, are all in continuity with one another. All of these blue lines. And these blue lines in the male, are going to form, here are blue lines again, are going to form Buck's fascia in the penis, which again separates the penis and the deep space from the superficial space. One final thing to note is, where is the cardinal ligament? The cardinal ligament is a condensation of this endopelvic fascia here around the uterine artery. So since the uterine artery is a retroperitoneal structure, it is going to be located, if this is the internal iliac, just by way of drawing an orientation, the cardinal ligament is going to be located like this. There's the uterine artery, and the condensation of fascia around that artery comprises the cardinal ligament. Relative to that is the important ureter. The ureter, remember, is water under the bridge, and it runs inferior to the cardinal ligament, which is on its way to the bladder, down that way. Okay, I think that covers it. In the next video, we are going to very briefly look at the clinical correlates related to all of these spaces and fascias.